Australia recently taken that role on, and it's great that this is part of our new initiatives to reach out to the Regional Arts Network. This is the first of 4 webinars, and the first thing I'm going to do is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all phoning in from, calling in from across the country, and pay our respects to their elders, both past, present, and emerging. This is the first of 4 webinars. This one's networking and engagement. The next one is addressing bullying and harassment in the workplace. Then we've got one on social media basics, and then we've got one on introducing the regional engagement guidelines, a piece of work that Regional Arts Australia have been involved in, looking at guidelines for engaging with communities. So those 4 will all occur between now and the big event on our calendar, which is Artlands in October, which I hope people will be registering for and coming to, when we will then put together another opportunity for people across the country to meet, obviously more in a face-to-face way, and talk and learn from one another. This session's going to run that I'm going to do a brief introduction about Regional Arts Australia. Then we're going to have a bit of a provocation discussion from Wesley Enoch. And then Mary Jane is going to go over some stuff around the making applications and to the Regional Arts Fund, which has just opened. And there'll be plenty of time for questions, and it's great seeing your feed coming in at the sides. It's the first time I've done this one, so it's good seeing that working too. So there'll be plenty of time for questions, and I think it's important to say that, you know, one of the reasons for us doing this is to actually reach out and listen to people, artists in the regions and remote areas of Australia, on what their needs are, how they want to network, and how they want to communicate, and how we best can communicate with them. So this is a new initiative. It's part of our professional development and connectivity. It's a whole series of things. This will be part of it, the webinars, but we're also looking towards the idea of having more networking. And it's interesting coming into the job, into this role in the last few months, and just seeing really what a unique position Regional Arts Australia is in. It has an extraordinary overview of the amazing, you know, I don't need to tell you people, you're doing this work, you know, and I'm an artist myself working, sitting here in Tasmania, you know, the amazing work that's going on across the country. And the Regional Arts Office has this extraordinary kind of overview of all the projects that have been funded through the Regional Arts Fund. And I think one of the steps that we want to move forward on in the future is to try and just make more sense of that data and connect people together. I'm not sure whether these webinars are going to be recorded. I think they're not to be viewed later. I think they're going to be live. Esther may put me right on that, but I think they are one-off events, but there'll be plenty of them coming up. So we are involved in a whole range really now of capacity building projects. We're a national organisation, and we're trying to build our status in that way. And for those of you who don't know, Regional Arts Australia does really 2 fundamental things. The first one is act as a voice for artists and communities across the regions and remote parts of Australia, and showcases that work, and as we're doing now, acts as a networking and capacity building program, hoping to do more of that. And the second and important element is managing the Regional Arts Fund, which has just opened. And that is a fund of around $13 million over 4 years, which goes out through agencies across the country to fund projects, arts and community, arts and health, various projects across the country that benefit the community through the arts. And obviously one other thing we are pretty important to do is to advocate for our program. And we were, John Oster, who's the CEO of this organization, who was here, who was on earlier, and he and I were up in Canberra last week, and we took with us a beginnings of a policy platform. Obviously, we've got an election coming up in probably early next year. And so we went up to gauge interest in and suss out some areas of interest to politicians and really start to put our case on the line of what we are requiring for the arts to thrive in the regional and remote parts of Australia. So we're really, I'm just going to look at my screen here because I've got it in front of me. We're after resilient regional communities, and we're advocating to do several things. The first one's pretty fundamental. In 2009, the Regional Arts Fund was cut back from about $22 million to about 13. That was a major sort of cut of the fund, and we are after the restoring of that fund. So we are lobbying for all parties to put that in their arts platform, that they will restore that fund from $13 million over 4 years to approximately $22 million over 4 years. We are great supporters of the ban of imports of fake art and fair trade on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art, that recent $150,000 that went out to support the pilot program. We're very supportive of that in terms of labeling, and that's something high on our agenda. We want to include culture as a key element in the Closing the Gap refresh document. That's obviously trying to get the arts up there in all areas of our work. And a big one for us that we're really trying to do some research on at the moment is to reinvigorate the National Arts and Health Framework. We are producing the beginnings of a piece of research around the value of arts in the health environment, which I think probably everybody who's listening to this webinar would speak to, but we need to gain more evidence for that. And I think in the arts, we're very aware of it, but perhaps in the health sector, they are less aware of the value of our work. We're quite keen to build a new fund, not to build ourselves, but to get the funds for a new fund for multicultural arts to encourage greater inclusion of diverse communities, actually diverse communities of all sorts, in regional arts work across the country. And our last one is a greater flexibility and efficiency in funding for arts touring. We're committed to that touring framework that allows us a quality arts experience to regional audiences, and seek a review of the Playing Australia Fund to ensure that the performing arts touring is more efficient and equitable. We took that platform to a couple of days of meetings in Canberra, got a very positive response. I don't think there's anything particularly sort of challenging there, probably other than finding the extra $9 million, but really that's not a lot of money given the number of projects that we fund, nearly 1,500 projects across the country over that period, all vibrant, rich arts projects. So I think that's enough on Regional Arts Australia and what we do. We're going to go to our next speaker. Actually, I've got a little bit of writing here. I'm just going to read you something that will introduce, I hope, Wesley. Sorry for the quoteless, Wesley, from Take Me to Your Leader. This is something Wesley wrote back in 2014. You may not want reminding of this, but I'm probably going to do it anyway. Do you want to make this country the best version of itself you can? Do you want to make the culture of this country one of engagement, debate, and civic pride? Do you want to see a world where the stories that excite us are about us or give meaning to our lives? Do you want to create work that transforms, transports, and transcends? Do you want to develop the skills to demonstrate, persuade, and convince the doubters of the world? That's a great, that's from this. If you haven't got that, get a copy. And I think on that, I may well be handing over to Wesley to give us a few words as our first guest speaker on our Regional Arts Australia webinars. Can I hand over to you, Wesley?
You can. I just need to... Esther, you might need to bring my camera back on.
Wesley is current director of Sydney Festival, Sydney Arts Festival.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes, thanks, Simon. Thank you so much. And all those people out there in the interweb. I'm currently at 7 a.m. or 10 past 7 in the morning in Dublin. This is a picture of Sir James Laverty, don't know who he is, don't know anything about him, but I'm going to say that he's one of the traditional owners of this country in Ireland, and just kind of acknowledge this sense of place that I'm sitting in here, and also all of you out there listening. This is my first time doing one of these kind of events, so it's great to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about artistic leadership and the notion too of what we can do as artists, and even more so artists who are occupying sometimes what is considered the fringe or the outside or the edges of society. I don't want to give too much kind of power to a kind of sense of urbanism being central, but there's sometimes this idea of the flow of resources that go actually big urban centers are the center of cultural life, and that the regions or even cultural fringes are not as important or resourced. I want to start by just asking this idea of what is leadership, what is especially leadership in the arts. There's part of me that goes, every part of society deals with issues, and leadership is a kind of unique perspective on how to solve those problems or those issues and how we can unfold them. Often what we need to do as leaders is look at what are the clear, or clarifying what the issues might be, saying, here are the things that we want to deal with, because you can't do all things all the time for all people. And then expecting a sense that by identifying these issues and by articulating them, that we as leaders can then gather together different views, opposing views, similar views, a sense too of a kind of way forward a lot of the time. And that we expect others to address these issues. That sometimes our job, especially as artists, is not to solve the problems, but to articulate them clearly so that we can embrace everyone in a sense of debate and discussion. I think in recent times, especially with the internet, there's been this sense of the echo chamber, that we are algorithmically brought together like-minded people, that by Facebook, by the way we use even the cookies on our kind of web searches, we are often being brought together with people who already agree with us. And that's not where change happens. Change happens when we are talking to people who are outside our sphere of influence. Often as artists, we sometimes will think that the primary audience for our work is other artists. And I find this quite challenging. As someone who comes from, outside the mainstream, though one could argue that I am the least kind of outsider kind of person in the arts at the moment. I feel very much privileged to be running the Sydney Festival and to be having run large theatre companies and being kind of Aboriginal descent, being in these positions of decision making. But there is a sense that as a kind of, as the mainstream is abdicating from responsibility for this kind of sense of artistic leadership, that where are those voices of dissent? Where are the voices, especially in, let's say, our writing and our art making, which come from different cultural backgrounds? And I'm also saying different class backgrounds in that as well. How few voices come from what would be considered the working class, in using that kind of term? And where are the voices of people who have a different experience of our country than ourselves? And we think of that as very important as artists, but how many outside of our artistic circles are thinking about that? I ponder for myself, what are the biggest questions that Australia has to deal with in the next, let's say, generation? The aging population is a big one. How we are feeling this kind of shift in perspectives as people are living longer, and having fewer children, and that is often being counterweighed by migration programs and things like that as well, that we are becoming a different society. I should just say here in Aboriginal society, it's almost the exact opposite. There are over 50% of Aboriginal people are under the age of 35, just because of fertility and people, living longer and things. Children, in terms of infant mortality rates, being a lot more successful in terms of living. But also the idea of environmental degradation, not just climate change, but actually how we are seeing our landscape changing out there in the world. through farming techniques, through, salination, through, yes, climate change and the idea of water. The idea too that there are issues in our society that about a kind of pulling apart of cohesion. You only just have to look at some of the commentary around David Leyonhjelm at the moment and go, oh, what he's actually doing is dog whistling to a particular tribe, his people who believe that it's right to say the things that he's saying. And I go, oh, and we who disagree with him are also being kind of there. And that this is a similar thing that's happening in politics around the world, where we are becoming more and more tribal. Maybe we always have been, but we're now seeing it in the way people operate in the media, and that things that were never problematic before, or maybe were hushed up, are now coming out, and people see it as a benefit. In this case, David Leyonhjelm going, I can actually be re-elected to the Senate through my notoriety. You read some of the articles in the Guardian at the moment, and they're saying, yes, this is what's happening. You get notoriety for your particular opinions. Pauline Hanson in particular, she can project a particular story out there, and through that story galvanize through the fears of others a sense of narrative that gets her and others who agree with her elected into our parliament and give them power. That there's this narrative forming of division in much of what we're doing politically, and so our migration patterns are being discussed, asylum seeker issues are being discussed in this frame, about a frame of fear, a lack of cohesion, and a sense of who is missing out. It's the people who feel that they're in the mainstream are missing out. I should also say that in this case, constitutional recognition, ideas of treaty, the native title, these are all big issues that we are facing into the future. And where is the art that is looking at these issues? Now, I'm all for art's sake. I believe that, not all art has to have deep meaning. In fact, I often think that there are three things as an arts leader you have to deal with. You have to deal with meaning, the idea of storytelling to change a nation, to affect a nation's trajectory. You also have to believe that there are skills involved, that either that skill is a community-based skill in galvanizing people to do work. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that every performer or artist has to be incredibly skilled. It can be just about participation as well. But the third one is about beauty or aesthetics, that as art makers, we want to make sure that things are aesthetically, if not pleasing, then at least affecting for us. So that idea of meaning, skill, and beauty or aesthetics are kind of playing themselves out in everything that we do. It's not always about the politics of the work. We also have to be incredibly valued artists in this world as well. I say all this because I think that the mainstream of our society is abdicating their responsibility to talk about these big issues, to create narratives and to form opinions that people can argue for and against, can take away from, even this, in my case, sitting in the theatre, listening to a story being exposed and taking that debate away with them. And so it's become more and more apparent that people who are from the fringes or from the edges are actually the ones who are more dynamically involved in how society is being shaped. So in my case, an Aboriginal storyteller kind of coming more and more into the fore because I have a reason to do my work. It's not just art for art's sake, though I would argue that's important, that it's actually the sense of people are hungry for different ideas to be expressed and for us to find a way through them. And I say this as a provocation to artists working in regional areas, because often you are the closest to issues of migration, issues of treaty and sovereignty, issues of of climate change and environmental degradation, issues of how towns are operating, because the regional centres are often microcosms of these big debates. In fact, concentrations of these big debates that are happening as a nation, and you are able to prototype the discussions for the rest of the nation. So for me, I'm on the lookout for the voices from the edge to come into the centre and occupy the centre more and more. Because often what we're not doing is giving enough space and resources for these stories. Now, I used to run a large state theatre company, the Queensland Theatre Company, and the moment when that funding was cut, and Simon, you talked earlier about the funding to the regional arts fund, and at that same time, the major companies were all being quarantined from the cuts. And I go, okay, look, no one wants to cut funding from an arts organisation. Everyone wants to believe that it's important. But when the majors don't respond or reflect these kind of values, I start to say, what are they there to do? I believe that the artistic directors in particular, but also artists working in those highly resourced environments, have a responsibility, like they are unelected representatives of a cultural parliament, that they as artistic leaders need to be giving voice to these bigger concerns. Now, it can get us into trouble with our boards, and there was some discussion there about, especially with some of the larger theatre companies, that their boards were disallowing their artistic directors from having any kind of say in the conversation with the Brandeis cuts. Also, our political leaders, we believe that there's a kind of punitive edge to what's going on at the moment, and so that there's a fear that if we engage in these kind of public discourse and debate, that there will be repercussions even for these large theatre companies or for the individuals involved. And we can see examples of that. Tamara Whitacott, who was working at NAVA, who was a very strong advocate during all this period. You know, number one, she burns out. Number two, I think there's this kind of pressure to move her on, and that the political capital that she expended during that campaign had a price. It had a price. And we have to look at whether that's whether we should be fearful of paying that price for the freedoms that we expect all the time. There is this sense that often what we do in artistic leadership is think of leadership as competitive, that there's this notion that here is one leader and then there's a competing leader who has a different idea. And that often I think we have to look at ourselves and say, where do we place our fellowship as well? So if there is a leader who puts their head above the parapet, how do we back them? How do we support them? How do we help them if they are in fact paying the price on a personal level, professional level, in a social level as well, being ostracized? How do we as individuals, audience members, arts workers, find that fellowship is just as important as leadership? Again, during all of that debate around the funding cuts that Brandeis exacted a number of years ago now, this notion of, if there was an outspoken voice, how do we find ways of supporting them? That not everyone will have the time, the energy, or necessarily the skills to be politically involved or to make change, but how do we find a way to say, yes, I can give my backing to this as an artist? How can I make work about it without trying to, find a disingenuous way of being involved? Like not everyone will be politically charged in the work they want to make, but I think that when you find a form of leadership that is right or that you agree with, how do you as individuals or organizations get behind it and make that support? So for me, I've kind of just put down just a couple of practical steps to go, how do we create more ideas of artistic leadership in our communities? First thing for me is about practicing expressing your views and articulately and constructively. How do we express our views and therefore also create a space for other views to be shared, even those that we disagree with? It's difficult. It's a very kind of lefty position that everyone should have freedoms to speak. Everyone should have the right of reply, even if they are in the minority. And I still hold true to it. I think it's a very important thing, even if we are listening to very ill-informed debate and discussion. How do we as individuals create spaces as artists for dissenting views and commentary? Not everyone will like the art you make, and we accept that. There will be reviews, there will be public opinion, there will be family members who don't like it. How do we create spaces that we are resilient to debate and discussion, and also we are articulate in our rebuff of those debates that are abhorrent to our own sense of values? To take the time, step number 2, to take the time to analyze your own values and your own ethical structures. So often we let things go by, and not many people who are listening in here, but there's a sense that if you're a non-Indigenous person or a white person in Australia, you don't question the air you breathe, the culture that you're living in, that often it's just there for you. And that it's actually people who are on the edges that are constantly questioning why something is this, or how that happens, or how do I fit in, or how am I a shapeshifter in our society? And therefore, the shapeshifters, the people from the edges, the fringes, are constantly in a dialogue with what mainstream society is assuming is the way it should be. And so therefore, people like myself and people you might know from the different communities, the migrant communities, from the queer communities, that there's a whole range of articulation of values and ethical structures in that straight away, and that we are having incredible, intense conversations with both ourselves, our families, our cultural milieu, as well as what is considered a mainstream or dominant culture. So I'd say for everyone, take the time to analyze that kind of your sense of values and your ethical structures. This is a great issue for me, number 3, that often we are listening so we can respond. There's that kind of a conversation going on at the moment about, we listen in preparedness to respond rather than listening to what's going on, what's happening to the person speaking. What are they really saying to us? Not just in the words they're speaking, but behind the words. And as artists, we are, I guess, great connoisseurs of the subtext, of the things behind the meaning. So how do we as artists remain open and listening to a society and to find responses, not just what we want to hear, not just that respond and agree with us, but how is it different? How are we kind of doing things where we can respond to where they're coming from? And this last one I've got is about disagreement, which I think is the point I've been making the whole time. How do we disagree? There's been a lot of issues around recently, and David Leinhelm has just been saying it most recently, this idea of no one actually has to own someone else's offense. Now, I don't necessarily prescribe to this. I don't think that's the case. But this idea that we as individuals are allowed to disagree, and if you like, to persuade others to our point of view, not through some kind of bombastic sense of you're wrong and I'm right, but also to place ourselves in a position of going, actually convince me you're right. Like to place ourselves in their situation to create, if not empathy, then at least compassion for another human being's situation. And how do we unpack that in an articulate way? As artists, we are we use the human condition to express through our art and for humanity a way of being, to prototype change, to imagine through a vocabulary of change what the future might be. Are we abdicating that role as artists? Are we saying that because our political and corporate leaders are saying that we need to be in a particular frame when we talk, that they wish to contain us into a particular way of thinking, that we have to agree with that? No, we can find ways of disagreeing. So for me, as someone who wishes and aspires to be a leader, it's how do we have these conversations of disagreement? How do we talk to power? And ultimately, it's about valuing our own position. At Artlands, when we went to Dubbo, 2 years ago now, one of the issues was saying, actually, we have privileged positions as people working in the regions, people who come from culturally diverse backgrounds. We have voices that can articulate for the nation what we can be in the future. Now, Well, I think we know this intrinsically, but sometimes we forget because we are fearful of our own power, and that our political leaders and corporate leaders wish to control that. So as artistic leaders, if we can say, these are our values, these are our ethical frameworks, we encourage debate, we encourage discussion, we know that we are listening actively with our society, and that we speak a truth that is, well, incredibly important for how the whole nation works, not just our community in a regional setting. How do we say to the nation, our voice is so important because we can teach you something that you don't even know you need to learn? Anyway, lots of things there. For me, this kind of sense of artistic power is very important. And I know that on a personal note, not every artist feels empowered. I know that financially, socially, there can be a great sense of disappointment in how the world works. But I think that what we need to do more and more is, how do we support each other? How do we find the fellowship when we need artistic leadership to support people through, not to have the tall poppy syndrome? And I guess ultimately to articulate the problems that we are facing, that we are seeing, and find ways of having unique points of view to solve them and to show a way forward. That's my 18 minutes. And, you know, I hope that people will disagree with me, because I think that's always a fun thing to do. But know that there's a great deal of support that needs to be expressed from people in my position, and that there's always an open door. So that please feel free to pitch ideas, come to me with discussion points, and to never feel that people in my position don't want to hear from you. So Simon, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak from lovely Dublin, as the world gets about its business. And good luck with these set of webinars, which I think are a fabulous kind of asset that you're developing here as well.
Thanks, Wesley. That's great. Yeah, I used to live in Dublin, so I know it well. I might just follow up with a couple of things. I mean, it's so good. Thanks for that. It's touched on so many things. I mean, you're actually putting quite a lot of responsibility on the artist here.
Yes,
I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, so I'm building that kind of alternative worldview, and almost, I don't know whether it's a narrative of hope in here rather than, or a narrative of, I'm not sure what that is, but how do we extricate that artist in those voices in the communities? You know, I mean, that's a big question, but that I think is something we're really trying to do. That was one thing I was going to mention. Just the other one, just to finish my point, was just about, you know, we're all about networking here. This is really the objective of this. And if we want to be, your wonderful phrase, fellowship and followers and leaders, fellowships and leaderships are going on, how do we, I always feel we don't as artists allow enough time in our doing to actually build those networks and take the time to connect properly. I don't know, what do you feel about that?
Look, I agree, and I think I'm a terrible kind of example of that too. That you use your personal life to make connections, and so there's outside of the professional environment, we're often making very personal connections and conversations. But also, we are driven by the kind of urgency of our role. Like, if I was to use an Aboriginal cultural perspective, that you as an artist in the tribe are hunted for and housed and looked after by the tribe, so that, you know, you can be the best artist you can be, that you can play a role for the tribe. And we all take that on really, that responsibility on a lot. We do it for less money, we do it in less time, we create a kind of efficiency which takes its toll on the individual. You know, how many people can, you know, find security in housing or have a family and all these things in the arts? It's often a huge set of sacrifices that we enact because we think what we do is so important, and that the only way we can express that is by the drive to keep output. And that when we have shrinking resources, we think we have to do more with those shrinking resources rather than do less, because we only exist through the making of the work. If we didn't make the work, then, you know, we would disappear as well. So we have to be our own arbiters of what's right in that environment. What's the right amount of work? And in the past, I've been going, what's the biggest impact I can make through the work I can do? I know Andrew Bavell recently, well, a couple of years ago now, at a speech, he was saying he only writes one play every 5 years. And so he has to choose that play very carefully to have the maximum amount of impact it can have. How do we as artists have that filtering process as well? How do we say, yes, everything's important, but we do have a hierarchy of impact that we can make with the limited resources, and how do we choose that? And it's difficult because when you see a group of young people in a community and you go, I know exactly what we can do. Here's an arts project, a cultural project that can bring that group of young people to life. Let's make that our focus. That's going to take you a good 2 to 3 years of really investing time and money and energy just to get it off the ground. You've got to believe in it wholeheartedly. And chances are you won't be able to do anything else but just do that with the resources. I know there are people out there who do more than that, but I believe to have true impact, you need to kind of give yourself over to it. And we don't do that. We like to spread ourselves very thinly. And often we are burning ourselves out and breaking ourselves. And therefore we aren't playing a long game. And so for me, the real challenge is to go, what do you leave aside? What do you put aside when you, in the plethora of things that are so important to you, what do you put down so that you can pick up the thing that will make the biggest change in your community?
Fabulous, Wesley. Thank you. I think that idea of artists being less competitive in the future would be great. I think more working in partnership. So let's work towards that, I think. So thanks for being in from Dublin. So my best to the Irish community over there. And
I shall.
Yeah, great to have you here on our first webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
And I think we're going to hand over to Mary Jane now. I think that's right. Are you sticking around, Wesley? You can. Okay, we're going to hand over to Mary Jane to talk something around the process of the Regional Arts Fund. Over to you, Mary Jane.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I just want to say, wow, Wesley, and thank you. That was incredible, and I certainly got a lot out of it personally. Now we're going to get really practical and talk about the Regional Arts Fund. And I've got a slideshow here. I'd like to know in the chat if there's anyone who is calling in rather than videoing. So I'm aware if I can't see the chat. What I'll do, sorry, I can't see the chat, so I'll just proceed with the slideshow. Hopefully everybody can see that. I've got the first slide up. It says Regional Arts Australia, a practical guide to the Regional Arts Fund. People can put questions in the either in the Q&A or the chat. I'm just seeing if I can bring the chat up so I can see them. Perhaps Esther can help me with answering the questions as well as we go through. So I'll try and keep this to about 12 minutes. But I am a font of knowledge of the Regional Arts Fund. So if people have questions after the webinar, if there's not enough information here or you have something specific, you can ask me, and you can also contact your regional program administrator in your state or territory. I'm going to okay. The Regional Arts Fund is an Australian government program that supports sustainable cultural development in regional and remote Australia. It meets the strategic priorities of supporting participation in and access to the arts and encouraging greater private sector support for the arts. So I'm just going to quickly pull that apart a bit. So the money comes from the Australian government. It supports sustainable cultural development. So that's things that are ongoing, that are collaborative, and where we see partnerships as a really positive part of the RAF. The strategic priorities of supporting participation in and access to the arts is kind of it reminded me of what Wesley was saying about how with arts, we often think that the audience for our arts is other artists, but actually the RAF is really designed to bring the arts to the broader community, to people who might not already be engaged in the arts, often as participants, not just as audience. But here in this picture, as you can see, these children were the subject of some silo murals in Canalpin. And so that effect, the impact on their lives is quite incredible, but I won't go on about impact. The government also like to see encouraging greater private sector support for the arts. So when you do apply for the Regional Arts Fund, it's always looked upon favourably if you can get support from lots of different sources, and usually in regional communities that can be from private business or community groups. It doesn't always have to be cash either, but we'll get to that. Community grants. So there's 3 different types of funding that I'm going to talk about today that come through the Regional Arts Fund. The first is community grants. So these are competitive grant rounds that are delivered in each state and territory. The grants are assessed by a panel appointed by regional program administrators. A regional program administrator is the organisation in each state or territory that delivers the RAF. So the panels are chosen by those organisations, and the assessment panel makes the choices about who receives funding. Quick response grants are about the funding responding quickly, hence the name, to assist regional artists and arts organisations to take up professional or skills development or small project opportunities. Community grants due to the timing or nature of the project. Often we'll see artists invited to perform at festivals across the other side of the country or even across the world, and they would go for a quick response grant to help them get there. That's probably one of the most common quick response situations. Of course, coming up in October is Artlands, and we will have Artlands travel grants through the Regional Arts Fund as well. These will be available through the local regional program administrator. And by subsidising the cost of travel and accommodation to attend Artlands, we aim to increase professional development opportunities for regional and remote artists and arts workers. So this funding is a small pool of funding that's available across the country for people to attend Artlands. It will be available later in July. So how does the funding get distributed across the country? The RAF is a devolved fund, so that means it operates at arm's length from government. So the government provide the funding to Regional Arts Australia, and then we then distribute that funding to each of the regional program administrators in each state and territory. Then these organisations make decisions about the funding in their jurisdiction. The types of decisions they make include maximum grant amounts, how often the grants are run, and some of the eligibility criteria as well. The regional program administrators include Arts ACT, Regional Arts New South Wales, Country Arts South Australia, Arts Tasmania, Regional Arts Victoria, Country Arts WA, and there'll be 2 new RPAs to be announced soon in Queensland and the Northern Territory. We're very excited about that, and so we'll keep you informed when that announcement happens. I'd just like to point out that Arts ACT don't run a competitive grant round. Their community cultural development projects are run through the Belconnen and Tuggerong Arts Centres. Every other state and the Northern Territory runs competitive grant rounds for community grants and quick response grants. I'm going to run through each regional program administrator. Now these slides will be made available after the webinar, so there's no rush to get this information down, but I do want to go through each one at a time. So Regional Arts New South Wales are our friends there. Community grants are now open. So they run 1 big round each year, and that's open at the moment. Those are for projects commencing next year. Quick response grants are also open. With New South Wales Quick Response, you do need to make contact with the grants manager there and have a chat to them in order to access the form. And this is really a helpful thing to do anyway, because the grants managers, they're the ones that know all about the grant and can chat to you about whether you're eligible or not and how to improve your application. Country Arts SA. These guys have Step Up and Step Out, which are under the Community Grants banner. Those are open now as well and closing the 15th of August. And they also have quick response grants that are open now. In Tasmania, our regional program administrator is Arts Tasmania through the state government. We have got a call out for a new RPA in Tasmania to commence next year. At the moment, Arts Tasmania are doing a fabulous job of it, and their community grants are also open later today, and they'll close on the 15th of August. Quick response, they run that a little bit differently in Tassie, and they do rounds every month. So the next one of those closes on the 29th of July. Regional Arts Victoria, our friends down south as well, they have community grants, have closed for this year. They did a bumper round at the start of the year, and they'll open again in January for projects commencing from the 1st of July. Quick response is open, and we look forward to Artlands in Victoria later this year too. Country Arts WA, their community grants are called Project Fund. They're opening now as well and closing on the 17th of August. The new RPAs will be announced soon. So I wanted to bring your attention to guidance materials or guidelines. So there are lots of decisions that RPAs make about how the RAF will be delivered. And these decisions include maximum grant amounts, grant types, the names of the grants that you've seen, some of the timing of the grant rounds, eligibility criteria, and whether multi-year funding is available. All the rules for each of the RPAs for how the RAF is run in each state are called guidance materials or guidelines. This is the most important thing when applying for a RAF grant. You really get into the guidelines and have a good read of those, because that's where all the everything you need to know is in there. And if there's some questions that you have after reading those, please contact the regional program administrator. So I can see that there's a couple of questions. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can see if those are things that I need to answer now. Looks like they're yes, okay. So Lee McIver, we don't know when the Queensland RAF is going to be announced, so we're waiting on the Federal Minister for the Arts to make that announcement. We'll let you know as soon as we know. Canalpin, yes, they won a Ruby Award last year. Wesley is staying on. Great. Sorry, everybody. Okay, there are 4 particular things that the RAF will not fund, and these are universal across the country. So I wanted to highlight those. The first one is a project that principally benefiting a major city or metropolitan location. So that's kind of obvious. It is the Regional Arts Fund. So the benefits of this fund need to remain in regional Australia. Having said that, the quick response funding is for regional artists to travel from their regional locations to anywhere else. So there's no restriction on where you can go with a quick response grant. In terms of community grants, it's really important that we see that the project has a sense of place and is based in its regional location. So that's because that's the point of the funding. The next one is projects that commence before the funding is approved. It's really important to think about that start date, and that the announcement usually happens just before the 1st of January or the 1st of July each year with community grants. The third one is components of projects that are also funded by other programs administered by the Australian government. This one can get a bit confusing for people. So this is not that the project doesn't have other funding from the Australian government, it's that it's not being used for the same thing. So we encourage, for example, people to pay artists and arts workers properly, and that's if they're sorry, it mustn't be a crossover of funding. So the component of the project that you're going for funding for example, if it's a festival, it might be a dance performance with the community. That's the RAF element of the project, and the rest of the festival could have all sorts of other government and private funding. And the fourth one projects which do not substantially align with and further the objectives of the Regional Arts Fund. And I'll get to the objectives towards the end. I wanted to show you the MMM locator. So that's the modified Monash model about the extent to which somewhere is regional or remote. And there's MMM 1 through to 7. So for most RPAs in their eligibility, they'll say that people who live in MMM 1 locations are ineligible. This is a really great map, and you can explore it online. Here's the link here. You can Google modified Monash model and look for the locator. You'll be able to search by suburb, and you can zoom in and out of the map and see where the boundaries of those different locations are. So the RAF objectives, there's 4 objectives. These are in no particular order, they're equally important. So the first one is increasing employment and professional development opportunities for and raise the profile of regional and remote artists. The fund is about supporting artists. The second objective, encouraging and supporting sustainable economic, social and cultural development in regional communities. So when we look at RAF projects, we look at all 3 areas, economic, social and cultural development in regional communities. Sometimes a project will shine in one area more than another, and that's okay. The third objective, developing partnerships and networks which leverage financial or in-kind support for specific projects and encourage ongoing collaboration. So this is about working in the community where you are, making partnerships, and that those are partnerships where both parties are listening to each other and are working together for the benefit of the community and the artists. The last objective is developing audiences excuse me, and broaden community engagement with the arts. Budgets. I wanted to highlight that Regional Arts Australia has a budget template. The feedback we've had is that budgets are the trickiest part of applications. So I've made a template and we've popped it up online. So you can have a play, download and have a play with this budget template if you're going for a Regional Arts Fund project. And either myself or the RPA staff would be able to help you work through any problems that you have in doing that budget. Just to mention as well, for New South Wales and WA, their budgets are slightly different templates, and they have templates on their website that you can also download and have a play with. This is just showing you what that looks like. We calculate the leveraged income of RAF projects, and that's because it's one of the big things that we report against back to the government, and we're very proud to say that projects leverage huge amounts of in-kind and cash support, and that's something that's looked upon really favourably. So, tips for applying. Number 1, work out what you want the funding for. What's the project or PD opportunity? I think it's a really good idea to know what you want first before you go down so that your project is solid. Number 2, read the guidelines and check your eligibility. Number 3, look at previous projects, see what else has been funded, and it will give you a sense of the types of things that get up in these rounds. Number 4, preview the application form. They're available online. We use Smarty Grants across the country, which is an excellent system, and you can preview those forms before you start commit to fill one out. Number 5, work on your budget. Take the time to look at the budget. The money is what you're asking for, so it's really important to get that element right. Number 6, talk with your RAF manager. You can do that at any point, but it's an important one to make contact with your regional program administrator. And don't give up if you're unsuccessful the first time. It's competitive. It's a competitive round, and I'd hate to see people get disappointed the first time they apply and then not go back to try again. There's some links and resources. There's the Department of Communication and the Arts. Regional Arts Australia has a suite of resources on our website, and your regional program administrator. This is me. I'm based in Alice Springs, and I manage the Regional Arts Fund nationally. And the Regional Arts Fund is provided by the Australian Government through the Department of Communications and the Arts. Thank you very much. Shall I hand over to you, Simon?
I think I'm coming online saying yes. Thank you very much, MJ, for that. It's a massively, I know, and I've been to the office, you know this so absolutely inside out. And I think the strongest recommendation I'd say to anybody is, if in doubt, call either your local RAF manager or you, if that's appropriate, to find out, you know, all of those answers to all the questions that people are going to think of after this webinar ends, because they're not thinking of them now. I am just going to bring Wesley is still around. I've said to anybody if they want to come back with any questions. We've got one from Celestine Doyle. Do you have guidelines for measuring economic, social, cultural benefits?
Yeah, that's done in a qualitative way. So we don't have a strict set of guidelines. Each application form will have a series of questions that tease out your view of the benefits. Specifically, I'll just give one example with community grants. There's a question, what are the benefits and relevance of this project to your community? What's written in the application forms goes straight to the department, and they really value that, and they love to read about those benefits. So Celestine, no, we don't have specific guidelines, but hopefully you'll find that the questions in the application form will frame that for you.
Thanks, MJ, for that answer.
Okay.
I was going to say, in terms of benefits, one of the statistics which people might be interested in is in 2014, it's on a bigger picture, you know, that actually contribution of arts and culture to the GDP was 4% of the national economy annually, which is more than agriculture, forestry and fishing, and pretty close to retail trade. So it's very important for us to get those leverage figures and all of that stuff to be able to then go to Canberra and make that case. So don't know whether you want to come in there, Wesley, about leveraging money. An expert on that, probably. No,
I think it's always easier when you have lots of it to leverage for more of it. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we don't have any more questions flying in. So I mean, I feel we've kind of covered the, you know, Wesley, you've dealt with the responsibility of the artists. We know what we've got to do here. We know what we've got to do, and the fund is a means of going to get some support to do it. So people go and do that, and you know, this, as I said, is the beginning of the first one of a whole series of things that we're really trying to help build that support level and that capacity for everybody to be able to step up there, as you said, Wesley, and take the reins for the new world. Maybe that's what it is. But maybe overstating it slightly. Thanks very much, Wesley. I think as we don't have any more questions, I think we can kind of wind it up for today. Is everyone happy to do that? Yep.
Yep.
Thanks,
Thank
MJ.
you.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Have a nice morning coffee now, I think. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you. So thanks, everybody.